So I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about capacitors and restuffing capacitors. These are wax paper capacitors that people restuff all the time, and also reproducing capacitors. And sometimes you get a set that has had capacitors taken out and replaced, and you might want to reproduce the originals to make it look original into the chassis. And there's lots of videos on the internet, and there's all sorts of articles about how to do this. And over the years, and I've been doing it a long time, I've tried various ways, and a lot of these ways are really messy and time consuming, and it puts people off doing it. So I've tried to simplify both the restuffing process and the reproduction process for paper capacitors. So tonight I'm going to show you a little bit of how I've developed that technique and give you a demonstration of how to do it. So I want to show you a chassis that it's a communications receiver from about 1941. It's a Marconi SMR3. It's quite a rare communications receiver. There's not many of these left. And the owner of this one asked me to reproduce as best I could underneath the chassis what it originally looked like. And I've got one pretty poor photograph of what one of these chassis looks like without any capacitors being replaced underneath at all. Wax paper capacitors are the brown capacitors. You can see there's quite a few of them in there, 20-something capacitors. And the two larger ones here are electrolytics. And you can use the same techniques I'm going to show you tonight to restuff those as well. It takes about the same length of time. But in the chassis that my friend gave me to work on, some of those capacitors have been replaced. So this photograph we should be seeing now, as you can see, there's several capacitors have been replaced. So there's some originals left. These brown ones are original. But this large white one here, the small white one there, they're Aerovox ceramic bodied paper and oil capacitors that have been used as replacements. As are these little yellow ones, little polyester film yellow capacitors, which sort of stand out like a sore thumb. Has not been original. And there's a lot of other non-original things in this set as well, which needed some more work. But initially I wanted to work on the capacitors and also replacing some of the resistors. And that's a whole other talk. I won't go into that tonight. So what the set now looks like after I've restuffed the original capacitors that were left in the set and reproduced similar capacitor bodies for the ones that had been replaced with the yellow capacitors and the white capacitors. I've also relocated them into the more or less the correct positions that they were originally. So you can see the difference. That's how it was to start with. And this is what it looked like originally before anybody did any work on the set. Oh, this isn't the same radio. It's another model, another set of the same model. Okay, so how do you do that? How do you go about replacing those capacitors with reproductions? And how do you go about restuffing them? So here we are at the workbench, and I've got a few components here ready to do the demonstration. So the tools of the trade are here, and all the parts I need to do the work. And what I'm going to show you is a 0.1 microfarad Sprague capacitor. This is a wax paper capacitor. Another one very similar, slightly smaller, probably a low voltage. That's 600. This is probably 200 volts. And this is the capacitor case. Once you've taken the wax out and taken the insides out, the capacitor, you end up with the capacitor case. This is a similar case that's been flattened out. And this is a reproduction paper, which doesn't look much like a reproduction paper at the moment. I'll show you what you do. And this is the finished reproduction capacitor. So wax paper capacitors are messy, right? They're covered in gunge. They've got wax in the ends. They've got wax all over them to keep the moisture out. So the first job I do is to take the wax off. But before I do that, I'll just talk a little bit about the other parts that are on the desk here. So these are just the typical yellow capacitors you buy from places like Just Radios or Sal's in the US. Pretty cheap, few cents each, not a lot. And to restuff one of these capacitors, my technique is to slit it, take the guts out, put the new capacitor in, and seal the ends up. It's really easy. It takes a couple of minutes per capacitor, and to reproduce them doesn't take much more effort. And most people, when they reproduce capacitor, will reproduce this artwork on a computer, and that's what I've done in the past. And it takes time and takes a bit of skill. And I thought, well, why not just take a photograph and try that? Because nobody's going to really inspect these capacitors really closely. So I flattened one out and decided to try just taking a photograph with a cell phone, and then that works. And just use ordinary paper to print it on a black and white printer, and I use amber shellac to give the final capacitor coat. So it looks waxy, but it's not. It's a perfectly dry finish. Okay, so the first job I do is to get one of these capacitors is to remove the wax. And this is probably the messiest thing of all. And I just get a pair of pliers, hold it up, get a heat gun, and melt the wax off. And don't melt the wax out the ends. There's no need to do that. It's just to clean the body up. Give it a wipe. And now you've got a capacitor body that's wax free, that you don't get your hands all sticky when you work in it. So that's what I've done to that one. Okay. So if you want to restuff it, all you do is get a Stanley knife and look at the capacitor carefully, and you'll see one part of it it's got no writing on it, right? Everything else, all the details of the capacitor around there. So there's a blank sort of side to it. You just get a Stanley knife and slit it. Screwdriver, prise it apart, take the waxy bits out. I usually keep them in a tin. Get rid of that. So you end up with so you got the capacitor body, right? So it's gone. The old capacitor's gone. So all you have to do to restuff it is you pop the new cap in. Now, caps come in different sizes. This one's a bit too big for there, but it would fit. Try these are all 0.1s. These are from Just Radios. These are from Sal's in the US. And that's the Sal's one as well. He sells different ones. You send off different times and you get different types of caps from him. So if you've got a selection of them, pick one that's going to be the good fit. Bit slack. So what you do if it's a bit slack, get some masking tape and roll a bit of masking tape around it. Doesn't have to look fancy. I'm going to see it anymore. Nobody's going to see this for a long time. Just to add a bit of bulk to it. Now it's a much better fit, right? Nice and tight. So what do you do next? Well, I use hot melt glue. I don't use wax. I use hot melt glue for the ends. So I don't like putting hot melt glue against the capacitor body. It's plastic, right? Just take a piece of kitchen towel, roll it up, pop it in, tamp it down. The same on the other end. And this acts as a bit of insulation. It doesn't really pad the capacitor out. You don't need that. You don't need to stuff it full. It just acts as a bit of a heat insulation. So you don't put in the hot melt glue against the capacitor body. Just get a hot melt glue gun, and I use brown hot melt glue. You can buy this from Daiso in Richmond, and you can get it on the internet. They actually sell this brown hot melt glue as hair extension glue. If you're looking for something, look for hair extension glue. And I'm sure you guys all use hair extenders.
Right. So you get your hot melt glue and you just squirt some in the end. And it doesn't have to be fancy. And I usually run a seam down the in there as well, right? You just open it up slightly and just run a little sliver of glue down there, not much. Squeeze this together, run it with your fingers, get the excess glue off there. I use the hot melt glue gun on low settings so it doesn't get really hot anyway. And it cools much quicker. So it cools quick enough so you don't have to hold the capacitor at any length of time to let the hot melt glue set. The thing's set in a few seconds, really. There you go. One stuffed cap. Tidy it up. It gets to a point where you can do these so quickly and you've got no mess. Your fingers are clean. If you were really keen and wanted to get you looking exactly as original, you could melt the wax down and you could dip it in the wax. I don't do that. I use this. This is amber shellac, £3 amber shellac. You can buy it in any hardware store. This for donkey's years. I've done several pieces of furniture with it. And I just keep a little bit in a tin and I keep adding some more alcohol to it and it just keeps giving. So you can use amber shellac on this and it gives you a sort of a more of an antique look to it. And the nice thing about shellac is it does not go sticky like wax does, right? Let's give it a quick coat of shellac. And when you put it in the radio, of course, you make sure that the seam is against the chassis, right? And that's a good idea of keeping the like a capacitance value and so on away from the slits. So the slit's hidden, and then you can see the capacitance value. You can see the manufacturer's name. That's how I normally leave it in the radio. That's it. Shellac dries in about 5 minutes, and you're done. So that's one restuffed spray cap. So what happens if you haven't got any caps, but you've got, or you might have one cap in the radio, you might have a few like in that Marconi. So you want to make a reproduction one. Okay, so you know what the original looks like, and you want to make an original, make a repro out of that. So I'll split this one as well. So you just pick the sort of plain piece of the wrapping. Split it. So say this is the one cap that you know is the original in the radio, or an example. There might be different values, obviously. The old one out. As I say, you have to. This is a little bit of a time-consuming thing, but you only have to do it once per cap value. Is to tease it out, and they tend to have been rolled up like that for donkey's years, right? So I find that sometimes you have to kind of wet them a little bit, or just warm them with a heat gun. This one's still got a bit of wax in it. Heat gun on the low setting. Just gradually tease it flat. If you do it too fast, you get cracks on the capacitor. It doesn't write too much, because at the end of the day, nobody's ever going to notice. It takes a keen eye to spot the difference between a repro and a restuffed one. I say it takes a little bit of time to do this to get the artwork right. So you just keep teasing it out, and you see it's already opening up a bit. But that might take you 5-10 minutes to get that nice and flat, like this one here. So once you get it to this point, you just take a photograph of it. And right, I'm going to just take you back to the computer. So you've got your photograph on your camera, and you load it onto your computer. And do you need any fancy graphics or skill sets? No, you don't. You only need is Windows 10 or something like it. And you've basically got the tools you need. Oh, one piece of software I use on a PC is EarthInView, which is free on the internet. Just Google EarthInView and you'll download it. And it's a great piece of software. And I use that to size things exactly, because when you print this out, you want it to be exactly the same size as the original. See, that printout is exactly the same size as the original. So you measure your cap and say, oh yeah, that's whatever it is. That's an inch and a half, say, yeah, inch and a half. So you can put that into the EarthInView and it prints it out exactly an inch and a half wide, and it scales this length automatically. So I'll go back and share the screen. Yeah, this software is Paint 3D, which comes free with Windows 10. So you can just open the photograph with Paint 3D, and this allows you to crop the photo. So you've got some edges on it, then just crop it using the crop feature here, and then that's all you need to do if you're happy with these values. If you want to fiddle with the values on the capacitor, you can do that in this software as well. For example, if you wanted to make this into a 0.002 capacitor, just say it's one of the values that you had, rather than, and you didn't have an example to disassemble and take a photograph, so you needed to reproduce something. You can select, use the select tool, and you can say take the 2 off the 2, and you can move it. Move that one over here.
Nice.
And I can put a 0 in there again. So you can use one of these zeros from somewhere else. So you've now got a 0.002 capacitor. It doesn't matter if it's not perfect. You won't see it on the final cut. So you then just save that, and I'll load that in a second. So the one we've just done is this 0.002 200 volt sprig top here. So if I right click on that and I open with, and this time instead of using Paint 3D, I'll use EarthInView. Yeah. And can you see that on the screen again? That's the same capacitor label as we had before.
Yep.
0.002, 200 volts, all we just doctored. Then in EarthInView, you can go to Image, Resample, and then it's in inches here. So all you need to do is to put 1.5 in there, it's the measured width of the capacitor. Say OK, it goes down to really small. You might find that looks a bit too sort of orangey to me. It's got to be a darker background, so I might tweak it a little bit as well. So in EarthInView, you can go to color corrections and you can change the contrast, for example, and maybe the brightness a little bit,
just so the background is not as bright. I'm sure there's other ways of doing this. You play around with it, you get the best effect. That seems okay to me. Do that. That's ready. You can save it if you want to save that for doing other capacitors. So you can just save it. And you're going to print it. It'll now print it exactly the right size. And I'm just going to print to a black and white laserjet printer. So I've now printed. I'm going to go back to the workbench. Okay, let's tidy up some of this horrible wax. And this is the one I just printed out. This is the 0.002, 200 volts. So what I'm going to do though is I haven't got a 0.002 cap to restuff at the moment, and that's the wrong size anyway. It's too big. I should have made it maybe an inch and an eighth or something like that. A bit smaller value cap, probably going to be smaller. So you can judge that by what's in your capacitor box. If you're going to some 0.002 caps and you want to make one, why not make one that's exact fit to the one you've got, or you a little bit fatten it up with some tape like I did the other one. Anyway, so I printed out another one earlier. I printed out another 0.1 microfarad. So I'll just show you how to make one of these 0.1s. So we've disassembled it, we've taken a photograph of it, we've printed the label. Next thing I'm going to do is just cut the label out. I'm sure there's ways of making several on one sheet. I know I used to do that when I actually used to draw the artwork out and take hours to get all the fonts exactly right and everything, and Photoshop the label in, the actual the manufacturer's logo and all that sort of stuff. It used to take me hours to do the artwork and get the best artist. So I tried to get a technique that's quick and simple. So here we've got the label, and what I then do is to get a pen or something and just pre-form it a little bit, just so it sort of takes out that round shape. So it almost looks like a capacitor already. Right. Use a little bit of a Prit stick or just a stick glue, just to hold it together while you're working. This isn't long term because this is going to come to pieces if you just use this. But the hot melt glue sort it out. So I'll just use one of these caps. And put a dab on the cap as well if you want, and then you just roll it. I should have called the video "Roll Your Own." There you go. It's not perfect because I'm not taking my time, but if you take your time a little bit, you can get it looking exactly right. Right, there you go. So there's your cap, and say that's just to hold it in place temporarily while you put the glue in the ends and put a bit of stuffing in it, a bit like restuffing one of the original shells I showed you earlier. Just poke some paper in there to insulate it. Actually, not enough now. Put a little more in there. It insulates it. Actually, that has a little bit of padding to it as well, and the same on the other end. After you've done this a while, you get to a point where you know exactly what you need to do. You don't need to think too much about it. You can just bang these off really quickly. So even doing a fairly large chassis with 20 caps in it or something, it doesn't take you much longer than just capping it. Just make sure that you get that in all the way around so the capacitor is not exposed, basically. Check you haven't poked the other end out. Sometimes happens. Let's get your hot melt glue. Straighten the leads a little bit. So if you leave the hot melt glue setting on low, the stuff doesn't flop around everywhere, and it sets within a very short length of time. I'd normally would leave that a minute or two to just let the hot melt glue do its thing, but it holds the whole thing in place, right? This won't come apart. That hot melt glue holds the capacitor shape, and of course you put the slit part of it hidden, so if it did start to unwind for some reason, it ain't going to show. And again, get the old amber shellac out. I guess if I was in Australia, it would be the other amber fluid, and give it a coat. I say it doesn't look much like the original now, but as soon as you get a bit of shellac on it, whoa, it just changes it. And the other thing about the shellac, it actually helps the paper keep its shape. It kind of sets the paper rigid, so it ain't going to move anywhere really. This stuff dries really hard, so it's really crusty and not waxy, which is great. So there you go. And it dulls down a little bit when it dries, so it's shiny now. I got a repro cap. And of course, I haven't got original anymore because I used it. Oh, I've got a spare. Oh, not quite the same. It's a bit of a fatter one. But there you go, Sprague.
Very nice.
So that's it. And just leave it in the vise. This one, that's the one I restuffed earlier. It's hardened now. You can put that straight in the radio, and you're not going to get hands all nasty and sticky doing it. And put this one in somewhere. But I'm doing a lot of them.
So Gerry, when do you decide between the two different methods? If you have one that you can take the guts out of and just put a new one in the same case, do you do that? But if you're missing one of the proper value, that's when you do a repro?
Yeah, that's exactly right. If the cap's got a full complement of caps in it, and I decide to restuff it, I'll restuff the originals, because that's obviously better than reproductions. But if a cap has got none of the originals in, it's been recapped by somebody else, or it's got part originals in, then I'll make reproductions to go in where the yellow caps have been in the radio. And so it's a good idea. I just put a big RCA for somebody. I showed you on the last call, I think, with the electric tuning. And these are RCA caps here. These are really easy to do. These are just, there's no wax on these guys. These are just, there's cardboard. And these can even be, you can even restuff these guys in situ. You can do them in the chassis. You don't have to, what are you doing? You don't even have to take them out the radio. This can be in the radio, right? Soldered in. And if you can get access to it with a knife, you can just slit it actually in the radio with it still wired into the circuit. You don't even have to take this. And the beauty about these guys is they've got little metal ends on them. Not every capacitor is the same. Obviously, different ways of making them. But the RCA type are little cardboard discs. See that? And then so you got two cardboard discs that go in the ends, and you got the body, and then the ends of the capacitor itself. So this is still wired in, right? You can do all this in the chassis if you've got enough room. You can clean this off with a bit of with a knife or something. If it's waxy, you can clean the wax off with some lighter fluid, and then you can solder onto that. That's just the end wire wrapped around several times, forming the end piece of the capacitor, right? And it's the same at the other end. So you'd end up with a gap where the capacitor used to be, and these are still wired into the circuit. You clean these ends up, and you get your new capacitor, and you shape the leads into a concertina shape, like so. And you do that on either end, or maybe a little tighter than that. So you've got some movement, right? And you do the same on that end. And then you solder that to this, you pre-tin it, and you solder these ends in there. So you've got a sort of a concertina end on both ends of this, and it's soldered into between the wires that were never taken out from the old cap. These are still soldered into the circuit. You got the new cap soldered into there. And then all you do then, you pop the sleeve over it like that. You can put a drop of hot melt glue in if you want, but sometimes you can just turn it around and the thing's been recapped and it's still in the circuit. And you've got the original leads here that look totally original. You got the solder joints in the radio are all original. All the new stuff is inside the capacitor body. And I've done this on a few radios now. I've never seen that technique anywhere, but I call it in situ recapping. And I might give a demo how to do that properly one day. Yeah. Anyway, there you go.
I think it was quite a good demonstration, and I think it's a real novel way of keeping a set original, because if it's a valuable set to begin with, it's probably better to do this type of work to it than just put in some, aftermarket smaller capacitors that, take away the originality of it. I thank you for a very good demonstration.